Hi, this is Rebecca Lane with Full Sail Online, and I am here to give you a lecture on vocal delivery. Now, I'm not talking about vocal delivery like being a singer, but there are going to be some very similar components. So similar, in fact, that I have an assignment for you before we even get started in this lecture. What I want you to do right now is press pause on this video. Before you press pause, go ahead and find one of your favorite songs. Find your favorite song and go ahead and just pull it up for reference. We're going to reference this throughout the lecture. And just for kicks and giggles, play about 1 or 2 minutes of that song so you've got it right in your brain right now. Okay? Now, press pause and we'll be back in a second. All right. Welcome back to the vocal delivery exercise. I want you to think about the song that you just found, that you just pulled up. So what about it draws you to it? When you close your eyes, how does it make you feel? What keeps your attention? What parts do you remember? What parts do you not remember? Is there a part in that music that you get bored? Is there a part in that music that really makes your body move? Think about the music. So now we're going to talk about vocal delivery and what does being a public speaker have to do with the song that you just pulled up. I know you're thinking that. Well, it has a lot to do with the song that you just pulled up. Our voices are instruments. And that sounds a little bit big to say, right? It's a public speaking class. I know you didn't come here to take voice lessons or anything. But your voice is heard with another person's ears. So we are going to cover in this lecture some vocabulary words that will help us tweak our voices so that people want to listen to them. And in fact, not just want to listen to our voices, but I'm going to talk about some tricks that might help you keep people paying attention and might help people remember the words that you are saying. So let's move forward. The first word that I want to talk about is non-fluencies. Now, when we talk about non-fluencies, they are vocal tics. So it's things that replace the pauses in speech. Think about when you hear people speak. Now, in conversation, people use non-fluencies. In this video, in this lecture, I am going to use some non-fluencies. You may notice them, you may not notice them, but I want you to pay attention to when it becomes a problem and when it's not a problem. Think about that. We're going to move forward. We'll also talk about verbal fillers. You need to be aware of verbal fillers. They're similar to non-fluencies in that we are still replacing pauses in speech, but they're not exactly the same. You know what I'm saying? It's like, we've got these, these words that they fill the space. So basically, it's like, fillers. Okay, so I'm being a little bit silly there, but we've got these words that fill the space. They give us time to think without letting people interrupt us, a lot of times in conversation. But remember, as the speaker, we do want to be a little bit of the authority. So at what point do the verbal fillers, the non-fluencies, start to undermine our authority? That's a good question. And each speaker has to make that decision for themselves. All right, moving forward. You need to be aware of pronunciation. So when we think about pronunciation, where do you usually hear this word, pronunciation? Well, probably you heard it if you ever learned a foreign language. Probably you heard it if you have been looking at Webster's dictionary recently. Pronunciation, how do we pronounce a word? So how do we say? Where does the emphasis lie along the word? I had a theater professor once who liked to be funny, and he would say emphasis on the wrong syllable. But really, what happens if you put the emphasis on the wrong syllable? And you're supposed to be the expert. What is the implication of that? It's good to know. Now, we're not just talking about pronunciation. We also want to talk about articulation. Articulation, it talks about this crispness, this clarity. Now, articulation has to do with the consonants of our words. Now, when we're thinking about consonants we make them through contact with our articulators. So what are your articulators? So you've got your tongue, you've got your teeth, you've got the back of you've got your soft palate, your hard palate, you've got your throat, and you've got your lips. So b, d, G, that uses your articulators. B, it's your lips pressing against each other. D, it's your tongue and your hard palate or your teeth. G, that is your soft palate and the back of your tongue pressing up against each other. So we've got articulation. Again, articulation can be done on a scale, and that scale could be a creative choice, and sometimes it's a scale that's based on the venue that you're speaking in, right? So those of you who study sound, you are aware that as sound travels, it starts to muddy together a little bit. If you're speaking in a space where your sound has to travel a long way, you want to make sure that you are articulating very clearly so that the people in the back of the space can understand what you're saying. But it's less important if you're in a closed space. So understand how crisp your articulators need to be for the space that you're in and for the level of authority you want to have. Now, projection is important because we really want people to hear us. It has to do with our resonators, and it has to do with the passage of air through our vocal cords. We want to be very conscious of our projection, but projection is not the same as volume. Volume is actually, it's a musical term. So think back to that song that you really, really liked. Are there points where it gets really soft? Are there points where it gets really loud? Are there points where that volume changes, where it fluctuates, where it adjusts? And how does that change how you respond? What happens when something is really soft and you kind of maybe bop to it? And what happens when it gets louder and it gets louder? And then what is your reaction? So we've got this volume. We can do that with our voices. We can do that as speakers. We can change how our audience is feeling about the words that we are saying based on how we use volume. It's a creative choice. It can be an artistic choice. It can be a very strategic choice. But you want to think about it. How fast, how soft. We also want to think about pauses, and a lot of times pauses really scare the bejesus out of people. And here's the reason pauses are scary. If I pause, it gives me time to hear you, my audience. If I pause, it gives me time to take a breath and to realize that I'm a little bit nervous. Also, if I pause, it gives me time to actually read the faces of the people that I am speaking to. So now you're probably understanding that pausing can be scary, but it's incredibly, incredibly essential. On the audience side, pauses have a completely different effect, right? So what happened? I just gave you a pretty long pause right there. It probably gave you time to think. Maybe it gave you time to breathe. Maybe it gave your ears a chance to rest. Maybe it gave you a moment to reflect or a moment to focus again. So remember that on a speaker's side, pauses can feel scary, but it's essential because we need to have those moments to pay attention to our audience. And from an audience perspective, pauses are essential because they give us time to reflect and regroup and pay attention to what the speaker is saying. So people leave out pauses a lot, but I want to really emphasize the value of a pause. Think back to the music, that piece of music that you found. Are there moments where the music stops? Are there moments where the vocalist stops? Are there moments where people take a breath? So even if it's not vocal music, if there's not a vocal line, if you have wind instruments involved, where do they take breaths? How does that affect what's going on? We also want to talk about pacing. Pacing has to do with speed. Am I speaking fast? Am I speaking slow? Is there a speeding up and a slowing down? Is it halting? Is it kind of going like this? And sometimes people talk like this. So what's the effect? How does that make you feel as an audience member? Sometimes I can speak a lot faster and that can make a difference, and sometimes you can speak slowly and it makes a difference. But what is the difference? Again, these are creative choices that you get to make as a speaker. So finally, we're going to talk about pitch. So pitch refers to the vocal tones, its inflection, its emphasis. All of the words that and when somebody is monotone, what happens is they're using the same pitch, right? So when we refer to people as monotone, they've created a pattern, a pitch pattern. And what's the consequence of monotone, right? It puts you to sleep. So the words that we have covered just now all work together to allow you to be a dynamic speaker. And the thing is that a monotone speaker, that feeling that we refer to as monotone, it doesn't just lie in the tone. It really rests in creating a pattern. So if I create a pattern with my pitch, it's going to be harder to listen to me. If I create a pattern with my pacing, it's going to be harder to listen to me. If I create a pattern with my pauses, or if I create a pattern with my volume, any of those things, it's going to be harder to listen to me. In order to keep your audience's attention, the goal is to mix things up. And ideally, we don't just mix things up randomly, but we mix them up in a way that makes sense, that emphasizes the words that we're wanting to emphasize. So one of the things that's a little bit more elusive is when people sound like they're reading. So I'm not reading a script right now, but right now I'm going to mimic a reading sound, and you tell me where the pattern lies, okay? So sometimes we sound like we're reading. When we sound like we're reading, we've created a pattern. What pattern do you think that I've created? Do you know? Can you hear it? Remember the vocabulary words that we've talked about. We've talked about pitch and volume. We've talked about pacing and pauses. So where's the pattern there? I have pitch variation, right? But I've managed to not vary some other things. And in fact, I'm using the same pitches over and over again. Ba-ba-da-da-da-da-dum. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-dum. Okay, and then notice that I didn't actually vary the pauses between my words. The pacing remained steady over the course of a sentence, and then there was a pause. You can rewind it and you can see whether or not what I'm saying is actually correct, right? So the pacing remained steady until the end of the phrase and then it stopped. The pitch, there was variation in pitch, but I repeated it over every single phrase. There were pauses, but only between phrases, not within the phrase. So how can you apply this to your own speaking? How can you apply this to your own formal speaking? What happens is when we are speaking to our peers or when we are in conversation, this kind of thing comes naturally. But when we end up in a formal speaking environment, these are some of the first qualities to go away. And they go away because we're nervous, or they go away because we've really practiced, and they go away because we're scared of looking silly, or we want people to take us seriously, and so we use a very deep voice, and we try to make everything very, very serious. And when things are very serious, we kind of pull it in a little bit. And that's okay. But it doesn't make for engaging speaking. It doesn't make for engaging storytelling. And it doesn't make for engaging conversation. So, what I want you to do is I want you to watch a video. This is a speaker on TED.com, and his name is Matt Cutts. And I want you to analyze Matt Cutts' vocal delivery. So I want you to reference at least 5 or 6 of the vocabulary words in this video. You can talk about pitch. How does he use pitch? What is the message that this pitch creates? Is it something that you would like to mimic? Is it something that you would not like to mimic? Why or why not? How does he use pacing? Does he use the same pacing? What's the rhythm? If you could put that in musical notation, what would it look like? Does he speed it up? Does he slow it down? Does he change? Does he have the same pace? Where does it change? Does he change over the course of a sentence? Does he change over the course of a phrase? Where are those changes? Does he change mid-sentence? Same thing with pauses. Does Matt Cutts use pauses? Or does he not? What is the effect when he pauses? What is a specific moment where the pause really worked? Is there a specific moment where the pause didn't work? Is there something that you would like to mimic? Also think about volume. Does he ever change his volume? Does he speak softer? Does he speak louder? Is there variation? And what is that impact to you as an audience member? Projection, can you hear him? Articulation, can you understand him? Does he ever soften his articulation? Does he ever crisp up his articulation? Pronunciation, does he say words correctly? Does he say words in a way that you feel that you think are comfortable in his mouth? Does he use verbal fillers? Does he say, like, such as, basically in a way that is filling space? Does he use non-fluencies? Are they there? Are they not there? Do they bother you? Do they not bother you? What is the impact? So we're going to go back to that link, and I want you to watch it. I want you to tell me what you think. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what kinds of things you want to add to your personal delivery. Make sure you answer those questions. They're going to make a huge difference in your presentations. All right, this is Rebecca Lane with Full Sail Online. Let me know how I can help. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.